Sometimes the cruelest room becomes the place where destiny finally speaks. A white satin glove slipped from trembling fingers and landed softly upon the polished marble floor, its quiet sound disappearing beneath a wave of laughter that swept through the grand ballroom like an icy winter wind. Hundreds of glittering chandeliers bathed the moon ball in warm golden light, reflecting from crystal glasses, silver ornaments, and elegant gowns as the kingdom's wealthiest alpha family celebrated beneath towering stained glass windows where a full moon shone through like a silent witness. Music continued without interruption as finely dressed couples drifted across the dance floor with effortless grace, but near the entrance, one young woman stood perfectly still, wishing only to become invisible. Olivia Hayes lowered her eyes toward the fallen glove before slowly bending to retrieve it, careful not to meet the stares surrounding her. She could feel them without looking. Curious. Judgmental. Amused. None of them stared at the delicate blue gown she had spent weeks repairing by hand. None noticed the simple silver necklace that had once belonged to her mother. Their attention settled upon the faint scar stretching from her left temple across her cheek, visible beneath the edge of the lace veil she had worn all evening. It was not large enough to frighten anyone, yet it seemed more than enough to erase every other part of her. Whispered conversations floated through the ballroom as effortlessly as the music itself. Some voices remained low. Others made no effort to hide their amusement. A pair of young noblewomen exchanged knowing smiles before one quietly leaned toward the other, covering her mouth behind a jeweled fan that failed to conceal the laughter shining inside her eyes. Across the room, several young alphas glanced toward Olivia only long enough to politely look away again, each choosing another dance partner without hesitation. The rejection came so naturally that no one considered it unkind. To them, it was simply the order of things. Olivia straightened slowly, brushing invisible dust from her glove before slipping it back onto her hand. Her heartbeat remained steady despite the tightening ache beneath her ribs. She had promised herself before entering the palace that no matter what happened tonight, she would leave with the same dignity she had carried inside. Beauty could disappear. Status could be stolen. Pride offered freely to cruel people could never be recovered. She remembered her late mother's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside her. Never allow someone else's opinion to become the mirror through which you see yourself. Olivia quietly repeated those words inside her heart while lifting her chin just enough to face the ballroom once more. Around her, laughter blended with violin music, polished shoes glided across marble, servants carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks, and moonlight spilled through enormous windows onto the dance floor where happiness appeared effortless for everyone except her. At the far end of the hall, the massive oak doors opened once again. Most guests barely noticed. They remained absorbed in conversation, music, and elegant performances unfolding beneath the chandeliers. A single man dressed in a long black traveling cloak stepped quietly into the ballroom without announcing himself. He wore no crown. No ceremonial escort surrounded him. He paused only briefly near the entrance before his calm silver eyes began moving slowly across the crowded hall. He ignored the musicians. He ignored the noble families waiting to greet distinguished guests. He ignored the lavish decorations that captured everyone else's attention. Instead, his gaze stopped upon the only woman standing alone beneath the moonlit window, the woman everyone else had already decided was unworthy of another glance. And for reasons no one in that magnificent ballroom could possibly understand, he never looked away. Olivia remained beneath the towering moonlit window long after the music carried everyone else toward the center of the ballroom. The polished marble reflected the glow of countless candles until the floor looked almost like a quiet lake beneath the stars. She folded her gloved hands together, not because she was nervous enough to tremble but because keeping them still gave her something familiar to hold on to. Around her, elegant conversations rose and faded like gentle waves. Laughter drifted from every corner of the palace, blending with the soft melody of violins and the scent of fresh roses arranged beneath crystal chandeliers. It should have been the most beautiful evening of the year. Instead, every reflection in every polished silver tray reminded her of the scar she had spent so many years trying to ignore. There had been a time when she believed it defined everything about her. She remembered the summer afternoon when she was only 8 years old, running through the hills outside her family's estate with wildflowers gathered in her arms. A frightened carriage horse had broken loose during a sudden thunderstorm, sending frightened servants rushing in every direction. Olivia had not thought about herself. She had seen a younger child standing frozen in the road and instinctively pulled her away just before the frightened horse rushed past. The child escaped without a single scratch. Olivia did not. The long scar that crossed the left side of her face became a permanent reminder of one selfless decision. When she was younger, her father used to trace the edge of the healed mark with gentle fingertips and tell her that courage always left a story behind. After both of her parents passed away within a few years of one another, those comforting words slowly disappeared beneath the whispers of society. The same noble families who once praised her kindness began lowering their voices whenever she entered a room. Invitations arrived less often. Dance partners disappeared entirely. Some claimed the scar made people uncomfortable. Others quietly insisted that appearances mattered more than intentions during royal gatherings. Olivia eventually stopped asking why. She simply learned how to smile without expecting one in return. Even tonight, she had almost refused to attend the moon ball. Only her elderly aunt had persuaded her to come, gently reminding her that hiding from unkindness only allowed it to become stronger. Olivia had spent 3 evenings carefully repairing the faded blue gown she now wore, sewing every loose thread by hand beside a small candle until midnight. She had pressed each fold with patient care, polished the silver necklace that belonged to her mother, and promised herself that she would walk into the palace with quiet confidence, whether anyone noticed her or not. A passing servant accidentally brushed against another guest, causing several sparkling glasses to slip from a silver tray. Before anyone else reacted, Olivia stepped forward and caught 2 of them before they struck the floor. The young servant looked up with wide eyes filled with panic. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Olivia simply smiled and helped rearrange the remaining glasses without drawing attention to herself. The servant hurried away with visible relief, but several nearby nobles only watched with mild amusement, as though kindness itself had become something unusual. Olivia returned to her place beside the window, unaware that someone else had witnessed every small gesture from across the ballroom. The man in the black traveling cloak had not moved since entering the hall. His calm silver eyes never lingered on jeweled crowns, expensive gowns, or influential families. Instead, he quietly observed the young woman who instinctively chose compassion even when no one applauded it. As another waltz began beneath the glowing chandeliers, he took his first deliberate step toward her, and without realizing it, Olivia stood at the edge of the moment that would change not only her own life, but the memory of everyone gathered beneath the light of the full moon. The orchestra welcomed another graceful waltz, and elegant couples flowed across the ballroom beneath glittering crystal chandeliers while Olivia remained quietly beside the tall arched window overlooking the palace gardens washed in silver moonlight. She watched the dancers with a gentle smile that never quite reached her eyes, reminding herself that attending the celebration had already required more courage than anyone there would ever understand. She did not envy the women surrounded by admirers or the alphas proudly leading them across the polished marble floor. She only wished that for one evening people might see something beyond the faint scar resting against her cheek. That hope lasted only a moment. A group of well-dressed young noblewomen drifted toward the refreshment tables nearby, their jeweled gowns shimmering beneath the warm candlelight. One of them glanced toward Olivia before whispering something that caused the others to laugh behind delicate feathered fans. Their voices remained low enough to appear polite, yet every carefully chosen word carried easily across the quiet space separating them. "I heard she almost stayed home." Another answered with a faint smile. Perhaps mirrors finally told her the truth. A third looked directly at Olivia before adding, "The moon ball is supposed to celebrate beauty, not remind everyone of unfortunate accidents." None of them sounded angry. Their calm amusement somehow felt colder than open cruelty. Olivia lowered her eyes for only a heartbeat before lifting them again with quiet composure. She had promised herself long ago that she would never answer unkindness with bitterness. Nearby, a young alpha approached the circle of noblewomen, and for one brief moment Olivia wondered whether he intended to invite one of them to dance. Instead, he looked toward her with polite curiosity before offering a shallow bow that carried little warmth. "Would you care to dance?" he asked loudly enough for those around him to hear. Several guests turned to watch. Olivia hesitated, surprised by the unexpected invitation. Before she could answer, the young alpha smiled awkwardly and continued, "Actually, perhaps it would be kinder not to attract even more attention tonight." Soft laughter rippled through the nearby crowd. He bowed once more, then walked away before she could speak a single word. Olivia remained perfectly still. She felt the familiar ache settle quietly beneath her ribs, but she refused to let disappointment reach her face. Across the ballroom, servants continued pouring sparkling drinks while musicians played as though nothing unusual had happened. Life inside the palace moved forward with elegant indifference. A young maid carrying a tray of fresh pastries hurried past Olivia, only to stumble slightly as another guest stepped backward without looking. Several small cakes slipped toward the edge of the silver tray. Before they could fall, Olivia reached out with calm, steady hands and caught them one by one, smiling reassuringly as she carefully placed them back in their proper places. "Thank you," the embarrassed maid whispered, her cheeks turning pink with relief. "You saved me from a very difficult evening." Olivia answered with a gentle smile. "Everyone deserves a second chance." The maid hurried away, still smiling to herself. Not far across the hall, the mysterious man in the black traveling cloak had witnessed every moment. He had seen the whispered insults. He had seen the thoughtless invitation offered only to become another public embarrassment. Most importantly, he had seen that even after enduring quiet humiliation, Olivia's first instinct remained helping someone else rather than protecting her own wounded pride. His silver eyes never left her as he began crossing the ballroom with calm, deliberate steps, each one bringing him closer to the woman everyone else had already judged far too quickly. Olivia quietly stepped away from the growing circle of whispers and wandered toward a long marble balcony overlooking the palace gardens where white roses shimmered beneath the full moon. The cool evening breeze carried the fragrance of jasmine through the open archways, gently lifting the edge of her lace veil as though the night itself wished to remind her that beauty still existed beyond the ballroom walls. She rested one gloved hand upon the smooth stone railing and closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing the distant music to soften into the background. The laughter inside the grand hall still echoed faintly in her memory, yet she refused to let it become the loudest voice inside her heart. Her mother had once told her that dignity was not something another person could hand to her or take away from her. It lived quietly inside every choice she made. Olivia drew a slow breath and smiled to herself, determined to return to the celebration with the same quiet grace she had carried into it. Behind her, a young serving girl hurried through the balcony entrance carrying a polished silver tray filled with crystal glasses. She was new to the palace, her nervous hands betraying every anxious step across the smooth marble floor. As she approached the doorway, the hem of her dress caught against a decorative chair. The tray tilted unexpectedly, and several glasses slid toward the edge. Before the frightened servant could react, Olivia moved without hesitation. She reached forward with calm, steady hands and caught the first glass before it slipped away, then carefully steadied the tray until every piece rested safely once again. The young servant looked up with grateful eyes that shimmered with relief. "I thought I was going to ruin the entire evening," she whispered. Olivia offered a gentle smile and carefully adjusted one of the glasses back into place. "Everyone deserves someone willing to help before they are judged," she answered softly. The servant thanked her again before returning inside with renewed confidence. Olivia watched her disappear into the ballroom, completely unaware that another pair of eyes had witnessed every quiet gesture. The man wearing the long black traveling cloak had followed at a respectful distance but stopped beneath the shadow of a stone arch instead of interrupting her. He had entered the moon ball without ceremony, blending easily among distinguished guests despite the calm authority that seemed impossible to hide. From where he stood, he had seen noble families ignore the embarrassed servant only moments earlier. Olivia had been the only person who moved without being asked. The silver-eyed stranger remained perfectly still, his thoughtful expression revealing neither amusement nor surprise. Instead, there was unmistakable admiration in the way he observed the young woman who continued choosing kindness after receiving so little of it herself. Inside the ballroom, the orchestra began another elegant waltz, and the master of ceremonies announced that the evening's formal dances would soon begin. Guests hurried toward the center of the hall, eager to secure respected partners before the music changed. Olivia gently smoothed the sleeves of her faded blue gown and prepared to return, expecting another evening spent quietly along the edge of the celebration. As she stepped back through the grand doorway, she noticed the mysterious stranger leaving the shadows at exactly the same moment. He was no longer simply watching. With calm, deliberate steps and unwavering silver eyes fixed only upon her, he began walking across the crowded ballroom, ignoring every noble who attempted to greet him, while the distance between their two lives quietly disappeared with every measured step he took. The grand ballroom seemed to shrink around Olivia as the mysterious man continued walking toward her with calm, unhurried confidence. Guests instinctively stepped aside to make room for him, not because they recognized his identity, but because there was something quietly commanding about his presence that invited respect without demanding it. His long black traveling cloak moved gently with each measured step, and although dozens of influential nobles attempted to catch his attention with welcoming smiles and courteous bows, he acknowledged none of them. His silver eyes remained fixed upon the young woman standing alone beneath the moonlit archway. Olivia noticed him approaching and instinctively glanced over her shoulder, certain he must be looking for someone else. There were countless elegant women in the ballroom wearing gowns embroidered with gold thread and sparkling jewels that reflected the candlelight. She could not imagine why a distinguished stranger would choose to walk toward her instead. As the distance between them grew shorter, conversations around the ballroom slowly softened. One by one, nearby guests paused in the middle of their discussions, curiosity replacing amusement. Even the musicians seemed to play more gently, as though the room itself sensed an unexpected moment unfolding. Olivia lowered her gaze respectfully when the stranger finally stopped only a few feet away. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strangely peaceful instead of uncomfortable. "Good evening," the man said at last, his deep voice carrying quiet warmth rather than formal ceremony. "May I stand here for a moment?" Olivia looked up, surprised by the simple question. "Of course," she answered softly. "The ballroom belongs to everyone tonight." A faint smile appeared across his face. "Not everyone seems to believe that." Olivia followed his gaze toward the crowded dance floor where laughter continued beneath the chandeliers. She understood immediately what he meant, yet she refused to answer with bitterness. "People often notice what is different before they notice what is true," she replied gently. "Perhaps they simply have not looked long enough." The stranger studied her expression with thoughtful admiration. He had expected sadness. He had expected resentment. Instead, he found quiet wisdom spoken without self-pity. Before either of them could continue, two young noblewomen passed nearby and deliberately slowed their pace. One glanced toward Olivia before whispering just loudly enough to be overheard. "Imagine spending an entire evening speaking to the only woman no one asked to dance." Soft laughter followed as they disappeared into the crowd. Olivia's cheeks warmed, but she kept her posture graceful and her expression composed. She had grown accustomed to such moments, though they never became easier. What surprised her was the stranger's reaction. He did not turn toward the women. He did not respond with anger or sharp words. Instead, he looked back at Olivia with calm sincerity, as though their voices had never existed at all. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what is your favorite part of this evening?" The unexpected question caught her completely off guard. She glanced through the towering windows where moonlight rested across the palace gardens like silver silk. "The moon," she answered after a thoughtful pause. "It shines the same way for everyone. It never asks who deserves its light." For the first time since entering the ballroom, the stranger's reserved expression softened completely. Something in her answer reached far beyond ordinary conversation. Around them, curious eyes continued watching from every direction, wondering why an unknown traveler had chosen to spend his time speaking with the forgotten Omega rather than the kingdom's celebrated noble daughters. None of them realized that every quiet word exchanged beneath the moonlit window was drawing the entire ballroom one step closer to a moment that would soon leave every witness speechless. The final notes of the waltz drifted through the ballroom like a gentle tide, yet neither Olivia nor the mysterious traveler seemed eager to break the quiet space that had formed between them. Around them, elegant couples continued gliding across the polished marble floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, but the stranger's attention never wandered from the woman standing before him. Olivia found it strangely comforting that throughout their conversation, his eyes had never once lingered on the faint scar along her cheek. He listened as though every word she spoke mattered more than every jeweled crown surrounding them. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen that way. "May I ask you something?" he said at last, his calm voice carrying the same quiet warmth that had first drawn her attention. Olivia nodded gently. "Of course." He studied her thoughtfully before speaking again. "If tonight has been so difficult, why did you remain instead of leaving?" She looked toward the dance floor where laughter continued beneath the golden lights before answering. "Because if I leave every room where someone chooses cruelty, eventually there will be no place left where kindness can stand." The words settled softly between them. The stranger lowered his gaze for only a moment, almost as though her answer had confirmed something he had been searching for long before entering the palace. A faint smile touched his face. "That is a rare kind of courage." Olivia gave a small shake of her head. "It does not always feel like courage." "The strongest kind rarely does," he replied. Before she could respond, the orchestra announced the beginning of the Moon Honor Waltz, the final ceremonial dance traditionally opened by the most respected guests attending the celebration. Conversations throughout the ballroom immediately shifted as noble families looked toward the center of the hall, each quietly wondering who would receive the honor of leading the first dance. Several distinguished alphas confidently adjusted their formal coats while young noblewomen exchanged hopeful smiles behind elegant fans. Olivia instinctively stepped backward, hoping to disappear once again into the quiet edge of the ballroom before the ceremony began. The stranger noticed the movement immediately. "Why are you leaving?" he asked softly. She offered a gentle smile touched with quiet sadness. "Some moments belong to other people." He looked at her with calm certainty. "Who decided that?" Olivia searched for an answer but found only silence. Years of whispered judgments had taught her to accept invisible boundaries she had never chosen herself. The stranger slowly removed one dark leather glove, revealing a steady hand marked only by the faint lines of countless responsibilities rather than jeweled rings or extravagant ornaments. Without haste, he extended that hand toward her. The simple gesture carried no trace of pity, no attempt to rescue her from embarrassment, and no performance meant for the watching crowd. It was offered with genuine respect, as though inviting an equal. Around them, nearby conversations gradually faded. Several guests noticed the unexpected scene and paused to watch. Olivia stared at the offered hand, hardly believing it was meant for her. Her heartbeat echoed quietly beneath the music filling the grand hall. "Would you honor me with this dance?" he asked. For a long moment, she could not speak. Every memory of rejection urged her to step away before another cruel joke could unfold. Yet when she looked into his unwavering silver eyes, she found only sincerity. With a slow, careful breath, Olivia removed one white satin glove and placed her hand gently into his. The instant their hands touched, an unfamiliar stillness swept across the ballroom, as though every candle, every violin, and every watching heart had paused together, waiting for whatever would happen next. Olivia's fingers rested lightly in the stranger's outstretched hand, and for one suspended heartbeat the magnificent ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. The orchestra continued playing the Moon Honor Waltz, yet the melody suddenly felt distant beneath the growing silence spreading through the crowd. Conversations faded one after another as curious eyes turned toward the unexpected pair standing beneath the silver glow pouring through the towering palace windows. Olivia felt every glance upon her, but unlike the painful stares that had followed her throughout the evening, this silence carried something different. It carried uncertainty. No one understood why an unknown traveler had chosen the woman no one else had invited to dance. She searched his face one final time, expecting hesitation or second thoughts. There were none. His calm silver eyes remained fixed upon hers with quiet respect, as though the entire ballroom had disappeared. "You still have time to change your mind," Olivia whispered gently, hoping to spare him from becoming the subject of whispered gossip himself. A warm smile appeared across his face. "I made my decision long before I walked across this room." Those simple words settled deep inside her heart. Slowly, he guided her toward the center of the polished marble floor where every chandelier reflected thousands of tiny lights above them. Guests instinctively stepped aside, creating a wide circle without anyone requesting it. Some noblewomen exchanged confused glances behind jeweled fans. Several young alphas frowned quietly, unable to understand why this unfamiliar man ignored every celebrated daughter of influential families in favor of the scarred Omega standing beside him. Olivia felt the familiar instinct to retreat, yet the stranger never tightened his gentle hold on her hand or hurried her forward. He matched every step to hers with effortless patience, allowing her confidence to grow naturally instead of forcing it. When they reached the center of the ballroom, the music softened into its opening measure. He placed one respectful hand near hers in proper dance position while carefully maintaining graceful distance. Every movement reflected impeccable manners rather than display. Olivia looked up, surprised by the quiet dignity in every gesture. "You dance as though you have done this 1,000 times, she said softly. His expression held a trace of amusement. "Perhaps I have simply learned that every dance begins with making the other person feel safe." The words touched something inside her that years of ridicule had nearly erased. As the first graceful turn began, Olivia followed almost instinctively. The faded blue fabric of her gown floated gently across the marble floor while moonlight shimmered across the delicate lace framing her face. For the first time that evening, she forgot to think about the scar she had hidden for so many years. She focused instead on the rhythm of the music, the steady confidence of her partner, and the unexpected peace settling quietly over her heart. Around them, the whispers slowly returned, though now they sounded different. Confusion replaced mockery. Curiosity replaced laughter. Even those who had ridiculed Olivia earlier found themselves unable to look away from the remarkable composure with which she carried herself. At the edge of the ballroom, several palace guards suddenly straightened their posture at exactly the same moment, exchanging subtle glances toward the grand entrance. The elderly master of ceremonies paused in the middle of announcing the next sequence of dances, his eyes widening ever so slightly. Olivia noticed none of it. She remained completely absorbed in the dance unfolding beneath the moonlit ceiling. But the stranger heard the distant sound immediately. Beyond the enormous oak doors came the measured footsteps of an approaching royal escort, followed by the unmistakable echo of ceremonial staffs striking polished stone in perfect rhythm. Without releasing Olivia's hand, the silver-eyed traveler lifted his gaze toward the entrance, and a quiet smile crossed his face, as though the moment he had patiently waited for had finally arrived. The graceful rhythm of the Moon Honor Waltz carried Olivia and the mysterious traveler across the polished marble floor with effortless harmony, yet it was no longer the music that held the ballroom captive. Every conversation had faded into silence. Crystal glasses remained untouched. Even the servants paused discreetly along the walls, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. Olivia scarcely noticed the hundreds of curious faces surrounding them. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like the woman everyone wished would disappear. She felt present. Seen. Respected. The stranger never rushed a single step. His movements remained calm and measured, guiding her with quiet confidence while allowing her own grace to emerge naturally. As they completed another slow turn beneath the chandeliers, Olivia glanced toward him with genuine curiosity. "You have not asked about my scar," she said softly. The words escaped almost before she realized she had spoken them. He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because it is the least interesting thing about you." Olivia stopped breathing for a heartbeat. She had prepared herself for questions, sympathy, uncomfortable silence, even polite lies. She had never prepared herself for complete acceptance. Before she could answer, the enormous oak doors at the far end of the ballroom opened with quiet precision. The sound echoed gently through the magnificent hall. A line of royal guards dressed in deep midnight uniforms entered first, each carrying ceremonial staffs adorned with the silver wolf crest of the crown. Their polished boots struck the marble floor in perfect rhythm before they separated into two disciplined rows leading toward the center of the ballroom. Every noble guest immediately recognized the royal escort. One by one, conversations disappeared entirely. The master of ceremonies lowered his head. Palace officials stepped respectfully aside. Noble families instinctively bowed as the escort completed its formation. Olivia instinctively began withdrawing her hand. "The royal family has arrived," she whispered. "We should move." The stranger did not release her. Instead, he gently tightened his hold just enough to reassure her without causing the slightest discomfort. "There is no need." She looked at him in quiet confusion. "Everyone is waiting." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "So am I." The captain of the royal guard reached the center of the ballroom and stopped only a few feet away from them. Every guest watched in complete silence, expecting the officer to escort the mysterious traveler away from the dance floor. Instead, the captain removed one white ceremonial glove, placed a closed fist respectfully across his heart, and lowered his head with unmistakable reverence. Every guard behind him immediately mirrored the gesture in perfect unison. Gasps quietly spread throughout the ballroom. Olivia stared at the unexpected scene, unable to understand why the king's personal guard would bow before an ordinary traveler. The stranger finally released her hand only long enough to remove the hood of his black cloak. Dark hair caught the warm candlelight. His striking silver eyes reflected the moon shining through the towering stained glass windows. Calm authority settled naturally across his face, not because he demanded attention, but because he had carried responsibility for so long that it had become part of who he was. The captain raised his voice just enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Your Majesty, the royal court is assembled and awaits your command." Every breath in the hall seemed to vanish at once. Olivia looked from the bowed guards to the man standing before her, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the orchestra itself. The elegant stranger she had trusted without knowing his name was not simply another noble guest. Standing only a single step away was King Adrian Ashford, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and the first thing he saw after revealing his true identity was not the scar upon her face, but the astonishment in the eyes of the woman whose hand he had chosen above every other in the kingdom. Olivia could no longer hear the orchestra. The elegant melody that had filled the ballroom only moments earlier disappeared beneath the pounding rhythm of her own heartbeat. She stood motionless in the center of the polished marble floor, her gloved hand still resting lightly in King Adrian Ashford's, while hundreds of noble guests remained frozen in stunned silence around them. The silver wolf banners hanging from the towering stone walls suddenly carried a meaning she had never imagined she would experience so closely. Every story she had heard about the Alpha King as a child returned in a single overwhelming wave, yet none of those stories had ever described the calm kindness she had just witnessed. She instinctively lowered her eyes and began to withdraw her hand. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the fading echoes beneath the crystal chandeliers. "Please forgive me. I did not know who you were." Adrian did not release her. Instead, he answered with the same quiet warmth that had first drawn her into conversation beneath the moonlit window. "That is exactly why I wished to meet you this way." Olivia looked up, confusion replacing embarrassment. Around them, the assembled nobles remained perfectly still, uncertain whether they should continue bowing or speak. Even the master of ceremonies waited silently, unwilling to interrupt the moment unfolding before the royal court. Adrian gently guided Olivia one step away from the center of the dance floor, not to hide her from the crowd but to allow her a little more space to breathe. His silver eyes never once drifted toward the faint scar upon her cheek. They remained focused only on her expression. "Every person who greeted me tonight recognized the crown they expected to see," he said quietly. "You were the only one who treated a stranger with simple respect before knowing whether he possessed power or none at all." Olivia struggled to answer. "I only tried to be polite." Adrian offered the smallest smile. "No. You chose kindness after others offered you very little." His words settled gently into the silence surrounding them. Several noble families exchanged uneasy glances. The young alpha who had publicly embarrassed Olivia earlier lowered his head, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. Nearby, the group of noblewomen who had laughed behind jeweled fans now stood speechless, realizing every whispered insult had been witnessed by the man they respected most in the kingdom. Adrian slowly turned toward the gathered guests, his expression remaining composed rather than angry. "Tell me," he said in a calm voice that carried effortlessly through the magnificent hall, "what did you see when Miss Hayes entered this ballroom tonight?" No one answered. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared quietly at the polished marble beneath their feet. The silence itself became an answer. Adrian continued without raising his voice. "Did you see a scar before you saw courage? Did you notice appearance before character? Did anyone ask how she received that scar, or did you simply decide it was enough to define her?" The questions drifted through the hall like the soft tolling of distant bells. There was no accusation in his tone, only disappointment that reached deeper than anger ever could. Olivia stood beside him, her heart filled with emotions she could scarcely understand. For years she had believed the world would always see her as incomplete. Yet the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories had looked directly at her without once allowing that single scar to become the center of her story. As moonlight poured through the stained glass windows and rested gently across the ballroom floor, Adrian looked back toward Olivia with quiet certainty, and everyone present sensed that the evening's greatest moment had not yet arrived. The silence inside the royal ballroom lingered so completely that even the flickering candlelight seemed reluctant to disturb it. No one dared return to conversation after King Adrian's calm questions settled over the assembled nobles. Olivia stood quietly beside him, still unable to understand how the evening had transformed so completely. Only an hour earlier she had hoped to leave unnoticed. Now every eye in the palace rested upon her, yet for the first time those glances no longer carried ridicule. They carried reflection. Adrian slowly turned toward the grand windows where the full moon illuminated the palace gardens with soft silver light before looking back at the gathered guests. His expression remained composed, neither stern nor forgiving, but thoughtful. "This celebration honors the unity of our kingdom," he said in a steady voice. "Yet unity cannot exist where appearances are valued above character." His words echoed gently beneath the crystal chandeliers. No one interrupted. Near the front of the gathering, the elderly Duchess Eleanor quietly lowered her gaze, her jeweled fan resting motionless in her hands. Beside her, several younger nobles exchanged uncertain glances, each remembering their own whispered remarks from earlier in the evening. Adrian did not ask for apologies. He did not single out those responsible. Instead, he allowed the weight of their own silence to become their teacher. Olivia watched him with growing admiration. She had expected power to sound loud. Instead, true authority seemed almost effortless. Without raising his voice, he had changed the atmosphere of an entire room. The master of ceremonies stepped forward cautiously and bowed. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "shall the moon honor waltz continue?" Adrian looked toward the orchestra, then toward Olivia. "Only if Miss Hayes still wishes to dance." Every face turned toward her once again. Olivia felt the familiar uncertainty return for only a heartbeat. Then she remembered something her mother had once told her while fastening ribbons into her hair before childhood celebrations. "Never refuse joy simply because someone else failed to recognize your worth." She lifted her eyes toward Adrian and offered a gentle smile. "Yes, Your Majesty," she answered softly. "I would be honored." Relief quietly spread through the hall. The orchestra resumed its melody, though now every note seemed warmer than before. Adrian extended his hand once more, not as a command from a king, but as an invitation offered with complete respect. Olivia accepted it without hesitation. Together they returned to the center of the polished marble floor. As the dance began again, the surrounding guests watched with new understanding. They noticed the kindness reflected in Olivia's eyes, the quiet confidence in the way she carried herself, and the grace with which she moved despite spending years believing she belonged in the shadows. The scar that had dominated every whispered conversation earlier in the evening gradually faded into something almost invisible. It had not disappeared. People's attention had simply shifted toward something far more remarkable. Adrian guided each step with calm precision while speaking quietly enough that only Olivia could hear him. "Do you know why I asked you to dance?" She looked at him with gentle curiosity and shook her head. "Because when everyone else looked for perfection," he replied, "you were the only person I found who never stopped choosing compassion." Olivia felt unexpected tears gather in her eyes, though none fell. They were not tears of sadness, but of recognition. Someone had finally described her by the choices she made instead of the mark she carried. Around them, the ballroom slowly transformed from a place of judgment into a place of quiet reflection, and as the final notes of the waltz approached, Adrian's thoughtful gaze rested briefly upon Olivia's gloved hand, as though preparing for one final gesture that would soon become the moment no one present would ever forget. The final notes of the Moon Honor Waltz floated gently through the magnificent ballroom before fading into complete silence. No one applauded. No one spoke. Every noble, every servant, every musician remained perfectly still as King Adrian and Olivia came to a graceful stop beneath the towering crystal chandeliers where silver moonlight poured through stained glass windows onto the polished marble floor. Olivia slowly lowered her eyes, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened since the mysterious traveler first approached her beneath the moonlit archway. She had expected the dance to end like every other moment in her life, quietly and without consequence. Instead, she sensed that the entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath. Adrian continued looking at her with the same calm respect that had never once changed since they met. His expression carried neither pity nor admiration born from sympathy. It reflected recognition, as though he had finally found something he had been searching for long before the moon ball began. He gently released one of her hands only to keep hold of the other with careful courtesy. Around them, countless curious eyes followed every movement. Olivia looked toward him with quiet uncertainty. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "everyone is watching." Adrian smiled softly. "Then perhaps they should learn what true honor looks like." Those simple words settled across the silent ballroom. The noble families who had laughed earlier exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what would happen next. The young alpha who had mocked Olivia stood near one of the marble columns with his head lowered, unable to lift his eyes toward the center of the hall. Even the elderly members of the royal council watched with deep attention, sensing that the evening had become far greater than an ordinary celebration. Adrian slowly raised Olivia's gloved hand with both dignity and gentleness. His movements were neither hurried nor theatrical. They reflected deliberate respect, offered freely before the entire royal court. Olivia felt her heartbeat quicken. She instinctively looked around the ballroom, wondering whether she should quietly pull away to spare the king unnecessary attention. Yet when her eyes returned to his, she saw only calm certainty. There was no hesitation within him. There had never been any. He spoke clearly enough for everyone gathered beneath the chandeliers to hear. "This woman entered this hall believing she would be remembered for a scar she received while protecting another child. Yet throughout this evening I have watched her choose kindness over resentment, dignity over bitterness, and compassion over pride. These are the qualities that strengthen a kingdom far more than flawless appearances ever could." The words echoed gently through the magnificent chamber. Several older nobles slowly lowered their heads, while others quietly closed their eyes, recognizing the truth hidden within every sentence. Olivia felt warmth gather behind her eyes, not because she wished to cry, but because someone had finally spoken aloud the story she had carried silently for so many years. Adrian continued holding her hand with unwavering respect. "Scars do not diminish honor," he said calmly. "Very often they reveal where courage once stood." No one challenged him. No one even attempted to interrupt. The ballroom remained wrapped in complete silence as moonlight rested across Olivia's blue gown and the silver necklace that had belonged to her mother. For the first time since childhood, she no longer felt the need to hide the mark upon her face behind lace or lowered eyes. She stood naturally, peacefully, exactly as she was. Adrian looked at her one final time before gently lowering his gaze toward the hand resting in his own. Every person in the ballroom instinctively leaned forward ever so slightly, sensing that the next quiet gesture from their king would become a memory carried far beyond the palace walls, remembered long after the music of that extraordinary evening had faded into history. King Adrian slowly lifted Olivia's gloved hand until it rested gently between both of his, treating the simple gesture with the same dignity another ruler might reserve for a royal ceremony. The magnificent ballroom remained wrapped in complete silence. Hundreds of guests watched without blinking, uncertain whether they were witnessing the end of the evening or the beginning of something history would remember for generations. Olivia's heart beat so softly she could hear every careful breath she took. She searched Adrian's silver eyes one final time, still wondering whether she somehow misunderstood what was about to happen. Yet there was no uncertainty within his expression. There was only calm conviction. With graceful deliberation, Adrian lowered himself onto one knee before her. A quiet gasp swept across the grand hall like a breeze passing through autumn leaves. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead while moonlight poured through towering stained glass windows, surrounding the unlikely pair with soft silver light. Noble families stood frozen where they were. Distinguished alphas instinctively straightened their posture. Even the royal guards exchanged brief glances before respectfully lowering their heads once more. Olivia's eyes widened in complete disbelief. "Your Majesty," she whispered almost breathlessly, "please, you do not have to do this." Adrian looked up at her with quiet warmth. "Yes," he answered gently. "I do." His voice carried no trace of performance or ceremony. It was spoken with complete sincerity, allowing every person in the ballroom to understand that what they were witnessing had been chosen freely. He carefully removed her white satin glove just enough to reveal her hand before holding it with extraordinary care, as though it were something precious rather than fragile. Then, with graceful respect, he bowed his head and placed a gentle kiss upon the back of her hand. No applause followed. No music interrupted the moment. Silence itself became the greatest witness. Olivia closed her eyes for the briefest heartbeat as emotions she had hidden for years quietly surfaced all at once. Every cruel whisper, every invitation never offered, every mirror she had avoided, every lonely evening spent believing she would never truly belong seemed to dissolve beneath one simple act of genuine respect. When she opened her eyes again, tears shimmered softly without falling. Adrian slowly rose to his feet, never releasing her hand. He turned toward the assembled court while continuing to stand beside her rather than in front of her. "Tonight," he said calmly, "many people believed they were attending a celebration of beauty. Instead, they have witnessed a lesson about worth." His steady gaze moved across the silent faces surrounding them. Beauty fades. Power changes. Titles pass from one generation to the next. But character remains when every other advantage disappears. Several elderly members of the royal council quietly bowed their heads in agreement. The noble women who had mocked Olivia earlier lowered their jeweled fans, unable to hide the regret written across their faces. Even the young alpha who had once laughed at her stood motionless, understanding that no apology could erase the choices he had already made. Adrian gently turned back toward Olivia. "You never needed the world to overlook your scar," he said softly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "The world simply needed someone willing to see beyond it." Olivia smiled through quiet tears, no longer trying to hide the faint mark upon her face. Beneath the silver light of the full moon, it no longer seemed like a flaw. It had become part of the story that revealed her courage. Around them, the ballroom remained wrapped in peaceful silence until, one by one, the members of the royal court slowly bowed their heads toward the young Omega, not because a king had ordered them to do so, but because respect had finally replaced judgment in every heart willing to see the truth. For several long moments, the royal ballroom remained wrapped in a silence so complete that the gentle crackling of candles could almost be heard beneath the towering crystal chandeliers. Olivia stood beside King Adrian with quiet disbelief still resting in her eyes, her unloved hand gently held within his as moonlight streamed through the magnificent stained glass windows and settled across the polished marble floor like flowing silver. She slowly looked around the great hall where only hours earlier whispered laughter had followed her every step. Those same faces now carried something entirely different. Some lowered their eyes in quiet reflection. Others watched her with genuine admiration. None looked at her scar before looking at her smile. That simple change felt greater than anything she had ever imagined possible. Adrian released her hand only after making certain she no longer felt alone beneath the countless watchful eyes. He stepped beside her instead of ahead of her, placing them on equal ground before the entire royal court. His calm silver gaze swept gently across the assembled nobles before returning to Olivia. "A kingdom is not judged by the beauty it celebrates," he said with quiet certainty. "It is judged by the kindness it chooses to honor." His words settled naturally into every listening heart. The elderly Duchess Eleanor became the first among the noble families to step forward. She offered Olivia a respectful bow, neither hurried nor reluctant, but sincere. One after another, members of the royal court followed her example. Distinguished alphas, elegant noblewomen, respected council members, and honored guests all lowered their heads with genuine respect. No royal decree demanded the gesture. It came freely, born from understanding rather than obligation. Olivia watched the remarkable scene with tears shimmering softly in her eyes. She had dreamed for years that people might stop seeing only the scar upon her face. She never imagined they would instead discover the strength she had carried quietly behind it all along. The young alpha who had embarrassed her earlier slowly approached with visible humility. He bowed respectfully before speaking in a quiet voice. "Miss Hayes, I believed appearance revealed character. Tonight I learned how wrong I was." Olivia looked at him with gentle compassion rather than triumph. "Then tonight was worthwhile for both of us," she answered softly. Her forgiveness surprised many more deeply than anger ever could have. Adrian watched the exchange with unmistakable pride. He had recognized kindness in Olivia from the moment she helped a frightened servant instead of protecting herself from ridicule. Now everyone else had seen the same truth. The orchestra cautiously began another melody, this time softer than before, allowing warmth to return naturally to the ballroom. Conversation slowly resumed, yet they no longer centered upon whispered gossip or careless judgments. Guests spoke quietly about courage, dignity, compassion, and the quiet grace of the young Omega who had changed the atmosphere of an entire royal celebration without raising her voice once. Olivia stepped toward the towering palace windows and looked out across the moonlit gardens where white roses glowed beneath the full moon exactly as they had earlier that evening. Nothing outside had changed. The gardens remained beautiful. The moon still offered its light to everyone equally. The greatest transformation had taken place inside the hearts gathered behind her. Adrian joined her beside the window, standing comfortably in peaceful silence for a moment before speaking one final time. "You once believed your scar would be the first thing people remembered." Olivia smiled gently as the cool evening breeze drifted through the open balcony doors. "Perhaps some still will." Adrian slowly shook his head. "No," he replied with quiet certainty. "They will remember the woman who taught an entire kingdom how to see." Beneath the silver light of the full moon, Olivia no longer reached for the lace veil that had hidden part of her face for so many years. She simply lifted her eyes toward the stars, her heart finally lighter than the fear she had carried for so long, while throughout the kingdom the story of the moon ball began its journey into legend, remembered not because a king honored beauty, but because he recognized the extraordinary worth of a woman who had never stopped choosing kindness when the world gave her every reason to do otherwise.